In the ancient land of Najoro, nestled between golden hills and the river Bani, stood a tree unlike any other, the tree of tears. Its roots ran deep into the red earth, its bark black as charcoal, and once every year, on the night of the new moon, the tree bled. Not sap, but thick, dark blood. And with every drop that fell to the soil, a virgin child in Najoro died. No one knew why, no one questioned it anymore. The people called it the death of the gods. Every year, when the tree bled, wails filled the night. Drums stopped beating, markets went silent, and the village buried another child. At first, the people feared the tree. Then, over generations, they learned to live with it, like a curse they could never escape. Mothers held their children close during the bleeding nights, fathers stayed awake staring at the cursed grove, and elders whispered prayers that went unanswered. But not everyone accepted it. In that same land lived a young girl named Namera, the daughter of a weaver. She was bold, sharp-minded, and restless. Her friends called her the stubborn one, for she questioned everything the elders told her. When she turned 14, her curiosity turned to anger. She had seen too many burials, heard too many cries. Why must the innocent die? She often asked, why must we live under the shadow of this tree? Her mother always hushed her, afraid the gods might hear. But Namera was not afraid of gods, only of ignorance. And so began the story of the girl who challenged a curse older than her bloodline. Namera lived with her widowed mother, Makuri, and her younger brother, Tumo, in a small mud brick house near the edge of Najoro. Their compound was simple: a thatched roof, a clay stove, and a loom where Makuri spent her days weaving bright fabrics from dyed raffia. Though poor, Makuri carried herself with quiet dignity. But behind her calm eyes lived a fear she never spoke of, the fear that one day, the tree of tears would choose her child. Namera had seen that fear too often. She saw it when her mother flinched at the sound of the new moon drums, or when neighbors whispered the names of the newly dead. One evening, as the red sun sank behind the hills, Namera sat beside her mother, watching her weave. The air was heavy, and the crickets had begun their song. "Mother," she said softly. "Yes, my child, why does that tree bleed?" Her mother's hands paused on the loom. The thread slipped from her fingers. "Namera, don't speak of that tree. Some things are better left alone." "But how can I leave it alone when children keep dying? When the gods do nothing?" Makuri sighed deeply, glancing toward the doorway as if afraid the night itself might hear. "That tree has been bleeding since before my mother's birth. Even the elders don't know its origin. We only know that when it bleeds, a life is taken. That is how it has always been." Namera frowned. "Then the elders are wrong. Everything has a beginning. Curses don't just fall from the sky." Her mother shook her head quickly. "Hush, child, don't let your tongue invite danger." The last girl who spoke like that went missing before dawn. But Namera would not be silenced. That night, while her mother and brother slept, she sat by the doorway staring at the moonless sky. The wind moved through the trees like whispers. She thought of the bleeding bark, of the children who never reached adulthood, of her mother's trembling voice. "Enough of fear," she murmured. "If no one will speak, I will." The next morning, she carried a gourd to the stream. The forest path shimmered with dew, and the sun filtered through the canopy like soft gold. Along the way, she met grandmother Zoleka, the oldest woman in the village, known for her knowledge of ancient things. "Good morning, Mama Zoleka," Namera greeted, bowing slightly. "Good morning, my child. You walk early today." "Yes, Mama, I wanted to ask you something." The old woman smiled faintly, her wrinkles folding like river ripples. "Then ask, but ask wisely." Namera hesitated. "Mama, why does the tree of tears bleed? What happened to make it so?" The old woman's smile faded. Her eyes darkened with memories. "My daughter," she whispered, "you ask questions that the wind itself fears to carry. I was born and grew old under its shadow, yet I too do not know. All I know is this: when that tree first bled, the earth shook, and the river turned red. Since then, we have paid for the sins of those before us." "But whose sins?" Namera pressed. Grandmother Zoleka sighed. "If you wish to know, go to the palace of elders. The king keeps the ancient scrolls. Maybe there you will find your truth." And with that, she walked away slowly, her basket on her head, leaving Namera standing beneath the rustling leaves, more determined than ever. That night, as thunder rolled far in the distance, Nemera whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, I will go to the palace. Even if they call me mad." The dawn that followed was wrapped in mist. A cool breeze swept across the land, carrying with it the scent of rain and the quiet song of awakening birds. Nemera rose before the first cockcrow. She tied her mother's old shawl around her shoulders, tucked a small calabash of water into her satchel, and stepped out into the pale morning. Her mother, half awake, called from inside, "Where are you going, my child?" "To the river," Nemera lied softly. "I will return before the sun is high." But her feet were not headed for the river. They turned toward Mount Aroka, where the Palace of Elders sat atop its stone steps, overlooking the entire kingdom of Najoro. The journey was long. She walked through farmlands painted gold by dawn, past huts wreathed in cooking smoke, and across the wooden bridge where the river Bani murmured secrets below. The path climbed steeply until the palace towers appeared like giants against the sky. At the gates, 2 guards stood with spears crossed. Their eyes narrowed as Nemera approached. "Who are you, and what brings you to the palace?" One barked. "I am Nemera of Najoro," she replied, voice steady though her knees trembled. "I seek an audience with the king." The guards exchanged looks, their expressions caught between disbelief and amusement. "The king has no time for children's tales," said the younger guard, waving her away. But the older one, with silver in his beard and wisdom in his eyes, studied her carefully. "Girl, what could make you walk alone to the mountain at this hour?" "The truth," she said firmly. "The truth about the Tree of Tears." The older guard's face changed. He lowered his spear slowly. "Come," he said at last. "A voice that dares to question fear must be heard." He led her through the great wooden gates, past the courtyard filled with carved pillars and ancient masks. The air inside the palace was cool, carrying the faint scent of incense and palm oil. At the far end of the hall sat King Barana, robed in deep blue, a leopard skin draped across his shoulder. His crown was simple yet powerful, a golden band set with cowries and obsidian stones. The guard bowed. "My king, a child from the village requests your audience. She speaks of the cursed tree." King Barana raised his head slowly, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Let her come forward." Nemera stepped onto the smooth stone floor, her heart pounding in her chest. "Speak, child," the king said gently. "What troubles your young heart?" She took a breath. "Your Majesty, I come to ask, what is the mystery behind the Tree of Tears? Why does it bleed each year, and why must a child die with every drop?" For a long moment, the hall was silent. The king's gaze deepened. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry centuries of sorrow, he said, "Come closer, child. You seek what even the elders tremble to remember. If you truly wish to hear the truth, then prepare your heart, for it was born of greed, betrayal, and blood." He gestured for her to sit upon a woven mat before him. The fire beside the throne crackled softly, and the shadows on the walls began to dance. And so, the king began to tell the story of the curse that had chained their land for generations. King Barana leaned back on his throne, his eyes distant, as if peering through the smoke of memory into another time. The hall grew quiet, even the sound of the crackling fire softened, as though the flames themselves wished to listen. "Long before I was born," he began, his voice deep and heavy, "our ancestors lived in peace under the rule of my great-grandfather, King Azan. The land was fertile, the rains faithful, and the people sang as they worked. But one man's greed shattered it all." The king rose slowly and walked toward the great mural behind his throne, a painting carved into the wall, darkened by age and soot. He pointed at a figure painted in ochre and red. This was High Seer Olumo, a man once revered for his wisdom and power. He served the gods of harvest and was keeper of the sacred grove. Every year, after the first harvest, our people offered grains, fruits, and goats to the spirits through him. For many seasons, all was well. The king's tone darkened, but as his influence grew, so did his hunger. Olumo began demanding more: gold, cattle, and even land. He claimed the gods required it. When my great-grandfather refused, Olumo threatened that the gods would curse Najoro with famine. The villagers, fearing divine wrath, obeyed his demands. But one season, after a long drought, their barns were nearly empty. They begged Olumo to spare them, to ask the gods for mercy. Instead, He declared that the gods demanded a sacrifice of purity, a virgin boy and girl, to restore balance. A low murmur rippled through the hall as the elders listening from the shadows bowed their heads in shame. The people wept, the king continued. But they were desperate. They trusted the seer more than their own blood. 2 innocent children were taken, twins, barely 12 years old. Their parents cried until their voices broke, but Olumo silenced them, claiming it was the will of the gods. The king's hands trembled slightly. When the sun set, the seer took the children into the sacred grove. They never returned. He paused, closing his eyes. The next morning, the skies turned black. The river overflowed. Blood poured from the roots of the sacred Iroko tree where the children had been buried. Olumo himself was found dead by the riverbank, his tongue swollen, his staff broken in two. Namera shivered. The air in the hall felt heavier now. That tree, the king said slowly, is what we now call the Tree of Tears. The spirits of those children were wronged, their lives taken by deceit, not by divine will. Their blood cried for justice. The gods heard, but they did not strike the people. Instead, they cursed the seer's deceit and bound his sin to the land. Thus, the tree bleeds once every year, and with every drop, a pure soul is taken to remind us of our ancestors' betrayal. He turned to Namera, his eyes now moist. When my father was young, the tree bled for the first time in his reign, and my uncle died that same night. Since then, not 1 year has passed without a death. I have sought wise men, healers, even foreign seers, none could lift the curse. Namera's voice was barely a whisper. Is there any way to end it? The king sighed deeply, returning to his throne. There is, but it is a truth no heart wishes to accept. He looked at her steadily. The curse can only be broken when a virgin willingly offers themselves to the tree. The offering must come from love, not fear. Only a heart pure enough to face death freely can satisfy the restless spirits of the twins. The words hung in the air like smoke. Namera's throat went dry. So, someone must choose to die. The king nodded slowly. Yes, that is the only way our land will know peace again. For many years, I prayed one would rise. But none ever did. The old drum in the corner gave a faint echo as the wind passed through the hall. Namera sat silently, staring into the flickering firelight. The truth was heavier than she had imagined. Yet, somewhere deep within her, a strange calm began to take root, a calm that came with understanding and the whisper of destiny. That night, after leaving the palace, Namera walked home under a cold and lonely moon. The wind moved through the grass like a ghostly song, and each step she took echoed against the quiet of the sleeping village. The king's words replayed in her mind. Only a heart pure enough to face death freely can break the curse. When she reached her home, her mother and brother were waiting by the fire, worry etched deep into their faces. "Where have you been?" Makuri cried, rushing toward her. "I went to the river and you were gone. Do you want to drive me to my grave?" Namera looked at her mother's trembling hands, her brother's frightened eyes, and felt the weight of generations pressing upon her shoulders. "I went to the palace," she said quietly. "I asked the king about the Tree of Tears." The hut fell silent. Makuri covered her mouth in disbelief. "Oh gods, what have you done, child? You went to the king about the cursed tree." Tumo stood still, his young face pale with fear. "Sister, did he tell you why it bleeds?" Namera nodded slowly. "Yes, and I know what must be done." Her mother's heart raced. "Don't say it," she whispered. "Please, don't say what I think you will." But Namera stepped closer, her eyes steady. "Mother, I have decided. I will offer myself to the tree." Makiri's cry tore through the room. "No, you will not. I have lost your father to war. I will not lose my daughter to the gods." "Mother," Namera said gently, taking her hands, "if I do not, someone else's child will die. Maybe Tumo, maybe another innocent. This must end with me." Her brother ran to her, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You can't. I don't want you to die. Please, Namera, we'll find another way." Namera knelt and hugged him tightly, feeling his small arms trembling. "You are the other way, Tumo. If I die, you must live. You must grow and remember that our people were freed because one girl refused to be afraid." Makuri fell to her knees, her voice breaking. "Namera, you are all I have. Don't do this. Let the gods find another sacrifice." But Nemera only smiled sadly. The gods are waiting for one who chooses, not one who hides. The next morning, word spread through Najoro like wildfire. The weaver's daughter had volunteered to face the Tree of Tears. Villagers gathered in disbelief, whispering her name as if it were a secret spell. At sunset, the palace drums sounded. The king summoned the elders, and the entire village gathered at the sacred grove. The air was thick with grief and awe. Nemera stood before the ancient tree, its dark trunk glistening with old stains. The roots twisted through the ground like the veins of the earth. King Barana stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Child of Najoro," he said, "before you take this step, I ask one last time, do you choose this of your own free will?" Nemera lifted her head. "Yes, my king, I do this not for glory, but for peace. Let no mother bury her child again." Her mother sobbed uncontrollably, held by two maidens. Tumo broke free and ran to Nemera, clinging to her waist. "Please, sister, don't go." Nemera stroked his hair. "When the rains fall next season, remember me in their sound. I will be the wind that cools your face and the star that watches while you sleep." The boy's cries shook the crowd. Even the guards turned away to hide their tears. Nemera then turned to the king. "Your Majesty, promise me something. Take care of my mother and my brother. Let them never hunger or suffer again." The king's voice quivered. "By my crown and my ancestors, I promise. They will live under my protection as long as breath remains in me." Nemera smiled faintly. "Then I am ready." She stepped toward the tree. The sky dimmed. A strange wind swept through the grove, carrying the scent of iron and rain. The villagers fell silent, many kneeling. Placing her palms on the rough bark, Nemera whispered, "Children of the first blood, I come not to defy you but to join you. May your pain end with mine. Let Najoro know peace again." Suddenly, a flash of red light burst from the tree, blinding all who watched. The ground trembled, and the sound of wailing spirits filled the air. Leaves spun like a storm around her, and when they cleared, Nemera was gone. Only the wind remained. The bleeding stopped. For the first time in generations, the Tree of Tears stood still, silent, dry, and peaceful. The crowd fell to their knees. Makuri fainted. Tumo screamed her name into the empty air. And the king, tears streaming down his face, knelt before the tree and whispered, "The curse is broken." The dawn that followed was unlike any the people of Najoro had ever seen. The sky, once shrouded in gray mist, broke open with light so golden it seemed the heavens themselves had come to bless the land. Birds that had long vanished from the forest returned, their songs mingling with the first laughter the village had heard in years. When the king's messengers went to the grove, they found something wondrous. The Tree of Tears no longer wept blood. Its bark had changed from black to a deep, soft brown, and where Nemera had stood, a cluster of white lilies had sprung, glowing faintly as though they carried a piece of her spirit. The people wept again, but this time it was not for fear or sorrow, it was for gratitude. For 7 days and 7 nights, the drums of Najoro sounded. The king declared it a season of remembrance. A shrine was built beside the sacred grove, where the lilies bloomed year-round. It was named, the resting place of the brave. Makuri and Tumo were brought to live in the royal courtyard. The king kept his promise, they wanted for nothing. Yet, even with the palace's gold and comfort, Makuri's heart never healed fully. Each night she lit a small clay lamp by her window and whispered, "Sleep well, my child. The world is at peace because of you." Tumo grew strong and wise. Though still young, he carried a quiet strength, a reflection of his sister's spirit. He would often visit the grove, sitting before the lilies and telling them stories, stories of the world she had saved. And sometimes, when the evening wind blew through the trees, the flowers swayed as if nodding in approval. As seasons turned to years, Nemera's sacrifice became legend. Children grew up hearing her name spoken with reverence. Mothers would sing songs of her courage, fathers would tell of her kindness, and travelers from far lands came to see the miracle tree that once wept blood. The king commissioned a grand carving on the palace gates, a figure of a young woman standing before a tree. Her arms outstretched, light radiating from her heart. Beneath it were the words, "Love is the strongest offering. It alone can cleanse what fear has stained." And so, peace returned to Najoro. Crops flourished again. The river ran clear. The famine and sickness that had plagued them faded into memory. But every year, on the night the tree once bled, the people gathered at the grove carrying lamps and flowers. They sang songs in Namera's honor, their voices rising into the starlit sky. And when the wind passed gently through the lilies, the elders swore they could hear her voice whispering, "Fear not the gods, for they dwell in the hearts that dare to love." Years later, when Tumo became a man, he too took up the craft of weaving. But instead of mats or baskets, he wove stories, tales of bravery, sacrifice, and hope. Wherever he traveled, he carried Namera's story with him, teaching others that courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to act despite it. And so her memory lived, in song, in story, and in the gentle rhythm of life restored. For as long as the lilies bloomed beneath the old tree, Najoro knew peace. And every generation that came after spoke her name with reverence, saying, "Here once lived Namera, the girl who gave herself to silence the gods, and taught us all that even in death, love can bloom. Gather close, children of the flame, for the night is deep, and the stars have begun their silent watch. Let the crackle of the fire be our drum, and let the wind carry this tale beyond the hills of Najoro. Once there was a curse that bled, a tree that mourned for centuries, and a village that forgot the price of deceit. But one heart, young, unshaken, and pure, stepped forward where even kings trembled to walk. She gave not her gold, not her words, but her very breath to mend the wound of the earth. And because of her, the rain found its courage to fall again. The seeds remembered how to grow, and the gods turned their faces once more toward men. So when you wake to a dawn that feels softer than yesterday, when you hear the whisper of leaves or the hush of the evening breeze, know that it is Namera's spirit passing by, watching, guiding, smiling. And should you ever face a darkness that feels too great, remember this truth written in her sacrifice. The gods do not hunger for fear, they answer to love. So ends the tale of Namera of Najoro, the weaver who silenced the tree and taught a kingdom to hope again. Now, let the fire rest, and let sleep take you gently. For the spirits of the brave watch kindly tonight.